But hey, man, I really appreciate you agreeing to talk with me. It's exciting stuff.
No problems, no problems.
You sound like you got some nice equipment over there. In fact, I went on your website and checked out a few of your videos. I love
Yeah.
that you write something and then you narrate it also. It's been something I've wanted to do, but there's one key element standing in my way. I'm incredibly lazy. I do the writing part, but I just don't want to do that, the actual recording part.
Yeah, the recording, I've got a bit of an advantage over most people because, pardon me, because I was a sound engineer for like 30 years.
Oh, okay.
So working in central London. So, you know, I know what I'm doing basically.
What did you what kind of sound engineering did you do?
Well, originally I started like most people. I started in music.
Okay.
I'm a guitarist and pianist and things.
Okay.
And I was a singer in a band and what have you. This is when I was a teenager. But sorry, my throat's a bit rough today. I was doing some narration this morning. I got behind the desk because I was better at it than I was at the singing and guitar work and things like that. But I very quickly moved over onto more post-production stuff. So working with voiceovers and actors and still musicians, doing everything from radio drama to radio documentaries to sound for TV to sound for film, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I did that right until the end of the last century when I moved from that into other things.
So you moved from something at the beginning of the century. So things have changed dramatically in the last 20 years, haven't they?
Well, they have and they haven't. It's odd because, I mean, I've just got back into recording audiobooks for other people. And it's been interesting because I'm going back to what I did 40 years ago. The technology's changed, but it's still an audiobook. That hasn't changed. It's just in an MP3 file rather than on a cassette, which is what it was when I started. I mean, when I started this game, it was before CDs were out. And in fact, I was sort of involved in some of the very earliest digital recordings that actually went out commercially back in the end of the 1970s. CBS, which became CBS Sony, but was just CBS in those days, was one of my clients, not far from where my studios were in central London. And I was just a very lowly engineer. And I worked with a guy there who'd just recorded a digital, he worked on the classical side, and he just recorded an orchestra digitally. But ironically, it was going to be released on vinyl because there wasn't any CDs around. Those hadn't come up yet. So although it was recorded digitally, vinyl, it was actually Sorry?
Vinyl's coming back, isn't it, in a big way? Kind of like this.
Yeah, it's sort of, but it's coming back as a trend thing rather than a serious technical thing. One of my great old friends was a guy called George Peckham, who was known as Porky. And in this country, in the UK, he was famous in a very cliquey way under the moniker of Porky Prime Cuts. And he cut the Beatles albums and he cut the Monty Python albums and everything like that. He was a cutting engineer. So he worked in a small studio with a big cutting lathe and beautiful mastering equipment and wonderful speakers. And he'd do the final mastering, make the thing sound wonderful, and then cut it onto vinyl. But
so interesting. I mean, just that itself is an art form. I watched a GIF the other day of somebody actually making a record. The putty they had, and they mixed it with other stuff and pressed it into the thing, right? Formed the grooves. Well, what the hell are they doing? It looks so edible.
Well, this was the stage before that, because when they do that pressing thing of literally taking the soft vinyl and pressing it between two plates, the two plates are what are called positive masters, and they're big metal plates. What George did is he cut the actual record using a reverse of a record player, if you like. So it actually cut the groove, and then from that master that he produced, they then produced these opposite plates, which have obviously, rather than got grooves, have ridges. And those are then pressed together to create the final, which has a groove on it. So it's
So
sort of
interesting.
an in and out process. But the point is he used to take our 1/2-inch stereo masters on 1/2-inch tape from the recording studios upstairs. And we used to record people like, well, in the early days before I was there, Hendrix, The Who were recorded in the studios I was at, Slade, or Aiello, all kinds of huge name bands. So he'd take these beautifully recorded masters and the Beatles as well in his earlier days, and he would then put it through a series of EQs where he'd take all the top end and all the bottom end out. So anything above 15 kilohertz, he used to wind off. And the reason is because vinyl can't handle it. So when people fall in love with vinyl again, what they don't appreciate is they're not hearing it in anything like the broad frequency that we were listening to the analog masters in the actual studio, because the studio tapes that they ran at 30 inches per second, 1/2-inch tape, beautiful, huge machines. These machines cost £25,000,
Wow.
Which was back then was
More than
2.5 times
£25,000.
that for dollars, because
Exactly.
when I first traveled to the States at the end of the 70s, I think the exchange rate was something like $2.50 to a pound. I mean, so
Oh yeah. It was better. It's still what is it now? It's equal almost, right?
it's about
almost equal
it's
now?
about 120, I think. It's not quite parity,
120.
but yeah, I haven't been to the States for years, so I'm out of touch.
It's
But
fascinating to me though that I'm listening to you talk about art. You know, you have somebody who has an idea and puts music on paper, and then he gets his buddies together and says, "Here, guys, let's play this and make it perfect." And they do, and then they go to the recording studio and they make a recording of it. And from there, that recording actually does go to somebody else who needs to transform it from what it was to something that's recordable, right? So it changes like for the
listenable,
final time, yeah, listenable. And if it's not for that, I mean, there's just so many changes to that thing from that one person sitting down and going, "I've got a brilliant idea," to the thing
And
that gets played on the
the
radio.
interesting thing about it is that at every stage there's a creative person involved. It's not just technical. When it all started, way before I was born, I mean, I was born in 1960, but so, all this started in the 1920s on tape. When it all started, that it was very, very technical. The sound engineers were guys standing by huge machines wearing white coats and all this sort of things. And in fact, up in my loft here, I've got
Oops, I'm sorry. We got broken up. I missed like a good 20 seconds of what you were saying.
Right.
I think I
Okay.
asked you, where were you in the process of it?
I was saying if you go back in time, to the early days of recording back in the 1920s, everything was very, very technical. And the sound engineers, I don't know if they were called, I think they were called sound engineers back then. They were all actually genuine engineers. I mean, you've got to remember the machines back then were mechanical. So
Yeah.
if anything went wrong with them, you fixed it with a screwdriver and a spanner. so it really was engineering. Even when I started, it was like that. I had to be able to take a tape machine apart. And
Yeah.
and we had in the studios I worked in, we had 3 dedicated guys working in our basement who were engineers. I mean, technical guys who, if anything went wrong in the studio, we hit the intercom and I used to go, "Dennis, it's all gone wrong." And Dennis would come upstairs and, with his bag of tools, take the machine apart and fix it. I mean, this was huge, big stuff. This is why you didn't get amateur stuff, you see, because
It was just too expensive. I mean, nowadays that's a good, what a good
and
segue into
physically
it, right?
big. I
Yeah,
mean, the
you just
first
can't afford
recording
it.
desk I worked on, pushed around on as a T-boy playing, was a Trident B desk in Trident Studios in 1978-ish. And that desk was, I don't know, 15 feet long, 20 feet long.
Yeah.
And it had been lifted into the building with a crane.
Crazy.
Huge,
It's still there,
monster
right?
thing.
Nobody can do anything with it. It's in somebody's
Oh,
apartment
no.
now. And
Long gone. Actually, I know, funny enough, I know who owns that desk, but no, we did work out ways of taking these things out. I mean, some of these desks, later on, the big SSL and Neve desks, they cost £250,000 of pounds, I mean, and so and a lot of them have wrecked, but a lot of them have ended up, you know, as cherished things in people's homes and stuff like that.
Well, that's interesting.
Some of them still use.
Could you buy the back in the day when you were talking? I love history. History to me is just ambrosia, right? It's so beautiful to think what happened is what.
Yes, it's a list of what we got wrong, which is always fun.
In the day when they were actually making.
Oh, sorry, you're coming and going. Are you still there?
Hello?
Hello? I wasn't getting anything you said.
I know. It's something's going on with the connection.
Do you want to try hanging up and redialing in?
Will make any difference? Whatever. It'll probably pass. We could try it again. Also, it all depends on your equipment.
I can hear you. So I can hear you now. So ask me a question.
It might be your equipment because you're so high quality. It's having a hard time going across the wire. If you want to analog it and somehow, you know, maybe turn off the awesomeness and go down to a different level, it might be transferable easily.
No, that won't make any difference at all to Skype at all.
Well, okay.
No, unfortunately. No, what it will be the connection between you and me somehow keeps dropping out. The internet is unbelievably unreliable at the moment because people are just all at home all over the world on it all the time.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's at breaking point a bit, I think, in places. I'm all right here. I'm all right here.
Where are you?
Well, I'm in a tiny little village in southern England, not very far from London, and we have a total population of 270 people here, I think.
All right.
And that's everybody, so much less houses. So we're all connected to one digital box, but my internet speed never drops. Because there's just not enough people using it here. There physically aren't enough people to use it. So I get wonderful connection here. It's great.
Do you think that the advent of modern technology making music more accessible to people has made music better or done nothing for it at all?
I don't think it's done anything for it as in making it better or worse. I'm not a believer in people. I see this on YouTube occasionally, and I occasionally get annoyed in post where people will listen to an ABBA song or something like that, or a Billie Holiday song, and say nobody can sing like that anymore. They all use autotune, and it's a complete load of bollocks because, of course, singers are human beings, and they're just as good now as they ever were. And the best of the singers are just as good as they ever were. Actually, they're possibly a little bit better because the training's better now.
Yes, right. But the education makes a lot of people more strong.
That's right.
Makes their careers last longer. I mean, what's her name? Adele? Is it Adele, the English woman? The big one who she lost a bunch of weight. I hear that her vocal styling was so damaging to her throat that she possibly won't be able to ever sing again.
Oh no, she'll be fine. No, she's perfectly all right. No, I think one of the main problems with Adele over the years is she smokes. I don't know if she still does, but she used to, which is not the brainiest thing. Funny enough, that is one of the big changes, is because as smoking over the years has got less popular, most singers actually don't smoke now. Whereas when I first started in the studios, I smoked, the tape ops smoked, the producers smoked, so did the singers smoke, and they all sang in this smoking environment. No, I gave up. I gave up in 2003, I think.
Good for you.
I went from 60 a day to nothing.
Yeah, like, oh really? I was 20 a day. That was 8 years ago though, and it was hard. It's just so inconvenient to smoke. You couldn't smoke anywhere. No, you can't smoke in the restaurant. No, you can't smoke in the bar.
I know. No. Well, actually, I mean, because I think our smoking bans came in about 2005 or 6 or something like that, somewhere around there. And it was, I knew that was going to coming, and so I was skint at the time as well, and cigarettes cost so much money.
Oh my God! Forget about it.
and confusingly for you Americans, we call them fags over here. And so I knew that was coming, and it was just sort of, I thought to myself, well, if I can't smoke in a pub or a restaurant or anything, I might as well give up.
But the thing, you have a pint, you have a cigarette, you have a conversation. That's like all three go together. I mean, I can't drink anymore, right? I can barely drink coffee in the morning because I just want that cigarette so bad. Not so bad. The feelings are definitely gone after 8 years, but it's amazing the hold that it has on you. It's like the rest of your life is dedicated to avoiding.
Yeah, I occasionally miss it, but then what happens is I'll walk past somebody smoking in the street or something.
Oh God.
Immediately I'll go, damn it, that was why I gave up.
So one of my neighbors smokes, or somebody down on the street is smokes occasionally by my window, and it's open, and the smoke will flitter in. It's the most disgusting moment of the day. Makes me regret having my windows open.
It's funny. It's become so much of my past now that I don't even notice it in books or when I write or anything. It probably wouldn't occur to me to put a character in that smoked. One of the books I wrote a few years back, it's a book nobody ever buys, is called The Stink. And it's about a group of 16-year-olds in North London, which is where I was born and brought up, in the 1970s, who start a band. And it was only when I finished the book that I realized that I had none of them smoking. And because it'd been so long since I smoked, it never occurred to me. But when I thought back to the 1976, which is when this set, in 1976, I smoked, my brother smoked, my dad smoked, most of my friends smoked. I thought, well, why didn't I have any of them smoking?
And what you could do as just a preface in the book, just a one-line preface, regarding smoking, consider every line of dialogue and action taking place with a cigarette in a character's hand.
Actually, what I did was because I noticed this before I actually self-published the book. I actually went back and made a point that the singer of the band didn't like people smoking around him, which wasn't uncommon back then, and so that it made the point that he hated smoking. Because he was into his voice, you see, and so that meant I didn't have to bring it up again, because that kind of sort of that settled the issue. But it was interesting that I spent so much time worrying about all kinds of differences between 1976 and now. And the one thing I forgot to mention was smoking. It was interesting.
That was one of your earlier works of fiction, though, you said. So, I mean, it makes sense.
It was the first book. It was the first book I self-published.
That's interesting. So, I mean, since then, it's character, right? When you start thinking about the people that you want to inhabit your world, you start thinking about the little things that they do. It's just, you have to describe stuff. And what are you going to, smoking is a great way to let people breathe for a minute. Give a bit of a background, or give it a little bit of description, or some thought or fantasy into the future.
It is, but I tend to use other devices now. I mean, most of the stuff I'm writing. Well, most of the stuff I'm writing now is fantasy, so and it's high fantasy, so it's set in other worlds, and so smoking kind of doesn't really come up on them. I'm sort of I'm not one for immediately making everybody sit around wearing tall pointed grey hats and smoking pipes. Because let's face it, the reason Gandalf smokes a pipe is because guess what? Tolkien smoked a pipe. So there was a link between what Tolkien did in the Lord of the Rings. When he described the pubs, if you like, the taverns. He described the pub that he and C.S. Lewis used to go to and sat around smoking pipes and sitting around talking about stuff. So all he did was he imposed his own cultural lifestyle on it. So I've only done the same thing with my fantasy worlds. So smoking doesn't really come up in my fantasy worlds because in my fantasy worlds, tobacco hasn't been grown. So there's no smoking. I don't make a point of it. It's just not there. But does
it bother you, or is it just our conversation on smoking? Because for me personally, I like the idea of vice in a story. Like you
Yeah,
want something that
but there's a lot of vices out there. Funny enough, I don't see smoking as a vice. I see it as it's kind of a historical blip, and I know that seems so daft because tobacco was first used as a way of smoking, and actually other things prior to tobacco, because tobacco is uniquely from your continent.
Mhm.
But people have tried smoking stuff around the world, all kinds of things over the years. But it's when you look at human civilization, which we've probably been farming for 25, 30,000 years
about that,
of
yeah.
in one sort or another. They think that we probably worked out how to light a fire anything up to 600,000 years ago. Civilization's very, very long. So smoking is only a very, very short blip in that, if you think about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, we
and
might have
most
just
of it just in the last couple of 100 years.
I mean, if you think about, there's been wild tobaccos. I think wild tobacco in lots of
Yeah, but
places has been quite popular. And one of the things
but
I think
only in
people
your
did,
continent. Only
well,
in your
maybe
continent.
I don't know because
Tobacco's from the Americas,
I think you can get like weed
as was
derivatives
the
too,
potato.
right? And you have incense
Was
and
it?
things like that, and
Yeah. And I
opium,
say people have tried to smoke other
inebriants,
things, but
cat, right? Isn't
tobacco's the
cat
thing that
smokable?
caught on. Hmm?
Yeah, cat is smokable. I think that KHAT, that
Oh,
African herb that
I
they
was going
chew.
to
I
say,
think.
yeah. I mean, I think they've been trying to smoke. I mean, the Egyptians have been trying to smoke stuff for years.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but
I was just thinking,
you'd be
that might.
amazed actually how much of this does revolve around tobacco.
Mm,
You said you like history. There's a
always.
lot of things in history that we forget because they're quite small, and actually they're amazingly important. One of them is the chili. Now,
Yes, is a great subject. Oh my God, I mention this to everybody. So, it comes from my neck of the woods as well. But Asians have had chilies as well for a lot of
no,
millennia.
they haven't.
But their food's spicy and they're used to it. And that's the
I know,
question. It's
but they
not a
never
chili
had.
like
But they
the
never had the
jalapeno.
chili until the Portuguese took it.
Is
The
that where the
chili,
spice comes from? Like even in Korea, the spice comes from the Portuguese.
the whole lot. The chili is
Interesting. So what was before
only
that?
from South America.
It wasn't spicy. I always heard that it was spicy.
No,
I
no, it
heard.
was spicy, but there's other things you can do spicy. Now, there's another side of me you don't know, and that's half my family, my mother's family, are all from the east. My mother was born and
Oh,
brought up in Burma, Irish
okay.
family, but
Irish.
Irish family, but she lived in Burma. She was born there in 1923 and lived there till the Japanese invaded in 1942, at which point she went to India, met my father, joined the army, and went into British intelligence. But consequently, Indian and Burmese food was, I was born over here in the UK, but Indian food has been a staple of my life, and I'm very good at cooking it.
It's a staple in England too, isn't it? It's very
Well, I am in
Anglified.
England, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, the curries here are not quite the same as India. That what I tend to cook myself is cook very Indian curries, genuine curries, because
Your
that was the
father
stuff.
is your father's Indian?
No. My father was English. He
Okay.
was from London. He's a Cockney. But my mother was born and brought up in the East, and her mother and father were both born in the East. Her family were out there for 100 years or so. So when they eventually, after the Second World War, came to this country, they brought all the recipes with them. So and these are the genuine, real stuff. But the interesting thing is the chili is a newcomer out there.
It's interesting.
The peppers are only from South America. The Spanish and the Portuguese brought them over to Europe, and the Italians fell in love with them. Italians love them, and
And
then
tomatoes too came in that same boat, I guess, because the Italians even had that before that. It's incredible what broadened the humanity's palate by rediscovering the what do you call it, the new world over here.
And shipping did this as well, of course, because although people did travel to the Americas long times before Columbus did, because obviously the Native Americans, both North and South, they had to get there from somewhere. And they actually came across the Bering Straits about 20,000 years ago, 20 to 30,000 years ago. I think there's a lot of argument about exactly when, but
I think some people are saying the Polynesian people were traveling back and forth, island hopping to, the
Yeah.
Galapagos and, Ecuador area.
Well, thankfully you can do. Yeah. I mean, it's the Pacific Ocean is a bit more connected than people think, I think.
Yeah.
Because after all, if you look at Australia, the various Aboriginals peoples of Australia, they arrived there long before white European did. And in fact, the white European himself is terribly new. People have only been white for about 9,000 years or something.
Well, white is just a stupid term, not to insult you if you think it's like a really important term, but it's really not even a thing. I mean, you say your mother's family is Irish and your dad's family is from London, but in all actuality, the mixture of peoples that made who you are is a mystery. I can back up my family to 1500 in Bern, Switzerland. Beyond that, I have no clue. Czechoslovakia, someplace in the east, they came from there, but ultimately we all originated in Africa. You know what I mean?
Well,
we all have that.
Yeah, I mean the North Europe. I mean, I'm not a great believer in the idea of race because it's a bit superficial, and I know I've got several scientists in my family, and they all hate the idea. But the North Europeans. I mean, for instance, my family are Celtic and Scandinavian. When I've done this through a DNA test.
Doggerland, right? Is that the Doggerland Peninsula area?
Doggerland's under the water now, but Doggerland vanished about 15,000 years ago, I think. But the white Europeans, which were all North Europeans, who became very pale-skinned and things over a period of time, but they didn't really emerge till about, I say, 7,000 to 9,000 years ago or so. So we're the newest, we're the white Europeans, and everybody around the world who's descended from them, they're the real babies of the bunch.
Yeah, I would even say the Aborigines.
Everybody before that were dark-skinned.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would even say the Native Americans in South and North America were new as well. You get like the oldest ones of the Middle East.
No, Native Americans are much older.
I would disagree, only because they crossed the Bering Strait, so they had to have originated at another place and then moved there. So they're younger than wherever they moved from.
But they think they've been in the Americas for 20, somewhere between 20 and 40,000 years.
Well, who's Clovis Man? I think Clovis Man is like 40,000 years, and he's a big argument. Sure. Right. Obviously,
I mean, all this is terribly difficult to date. I mean, to start with European peoples, and actually probably earlier, we've all got a little bit of Neanderthal in us, in our DNA as well, because Neanderthals and us are both Homo erectus. We're both from Africa, but the Neanderthal people and another lot, which I've forgotten the name of,
the Denivians or something like that.
That's Denovians, yeah.
Denovians,
But they came over from Africa considerably earlier. They seem to be
right.
Yeah, much earlier migration. But of course, they are the same species as us, albeit separated by thousands and thousands of years. Consequently, we were able to breed because the big clue at the end of the day, if two animals can breed together, they must be the same species.
Exactly.
You can't have breeding from two different species. So the fact that we have Neanderthal in us means we must be the same species to them.
Exactly. Because I mean, you have animals that can breed together, but usually they result in a mixture that cannot breed. So like you have a liger, it's a mixture of a tiger and a lion, and obviously they're both.
Yeah, but they are the same. But they are the same species.
But they're the same species. They can't. The liger can't breed, though. I don't think.
Or Tyone. Tyone's the other one. Liger and Tyone.
Like a mule or whatever.
It's the opposite way around.
Yeah, no,
mules can't. But there's something strange about the mule. Which I can't. This is where I'm afraid I've become very much a.
Hey, let me ask you this, because we got on this subject discussing chilies, which is fascinating because Columbus came back from the New World, boat loaded up with peppers, and he tried to. That's why it's called pepper. That's why they call them peppers. Is the dude tried to pass them off as the Indian pepper
because they're peppery, yeah.
Yeah, because they're peppery, but they weren't what their Europeans wanted spices. They wanted those giant mounds of spices that the Middle East and India were famous for, right? That's where they were coming from. what is that then? If it's not a pepper, it's making everything so fucking spicy.
They're capsicums. They're paprika. They're all the same family.
So the same family.
They're all capsicums, and it's I've forgotten what his name is. The actual stuff, which is actually mostly in the membrane of the pepper, which is this very, very hot substance. But it's a different sort. It's a different type of heat to what you get in ginger, for instance. Ginger is actually quite hot.
Yeah,
and the Asian peoples generally, including the Indian subcontinent, prior to using the chili, they used peppercorns, black pepper, which is an Eastern thing, and they used ginger hugely, both of which were out there, and those were used to make hot curries, but they didn't make them anywhere near as hot as they were able to when the red pepper family, which includes mild peppers as well, made it from Americas, and then obviously it changed the nature of their food. But you got to remember quite how long that was out there. I mean, Cumberland once in 1492, he landed on this place and decided to call it, I was going to say Maynard's. It's a bit of an old joke. I used to make commercials for Maynard's American Hard Gum. Sorry. Strange aside, we did this a joke ad where Columbus lands on the shores and he finds this chewy thing with a label, and he says, "I will call this land Maynard's." Bad joke, but there you go. But anyway, but 14.
History is skewed, isn't it? I mean, you don't even know.
Well, particularly when the advertisers get hold of it, we really skew it. There's actually, get off chilies for a moment. There's a lovely example of that. Let's bring it back into our century, perhaps.
Sure.
There's a very ancient pub food over here called the Ploughman's Lunch, and it's basically
the Ploughman's Lunch. What is it?
And it's basically it's bread, cheese, sometimes ham, pickled onion. Real sort of natural yokel stuff.
Interesting.
And if you ask most people in this country, where did the Ploughman's Lunch come from? They'll go, oh, it must be an ancient rural tradition, several hundred years old, because obviously we've had pubs in this country going back over 1,000 years.
You have one that's that old too, don't you? There's one as old as 1,000.
Yes, I'm not sure if we have a pub in a building that's 1,000 years. We have a few that are like 700 or 800 years old. I'm not sure we read, but taverns have been here. I mean, we inherited taverns from the Romans, for goodness sake. So and the Romans were here up until 300 AD. So I mean, so it's a very old concept. But so people will say that, but actually, the Ploughman's Lunch dates back to about 1954, I think it is. And it was invented by two advertising guys.
Love it.
Who invented this thing for a chain of pubs they were working for, and who were looking for a meal. So they came up with this idea, and they called it a Ploughman's. So they did, and it caught on, and its origins got forgotten really, really quickly. And then every pub up and down the country sold a Ploughman's as a sort of standard thing. If they sold nothing else, they sold a Ploughman's. And just everybody assumed it was an ancient traditional dish. And it's not. It only dates.
To add something onto that, during that time, specifically the 50s, men were coming, professionals were the soldiers that fought in World War II. So they went to these regional places in the Netherlands or Germany or France or Belgium or even, wherever, the Middle East, Italy. They went to these places and they stole the regional recipes for their own, because, you had peasants that would bring them food and said, here, what do you want to eat? I'll sell you whatever you want. And they would bring them the food and they would call it something completely different than what they normally call it. They would use English words for it. And the people, the soldiers, would grab onto it and go, oh, I want the Ploughman's meal. So it starts in the middle of someplace that you don't want to be.
I mean, actually, it sort of brings us right back to creative languages, is where you and I land, which is the fact that peoples have a habit of imposing their own names and their own ideas on others.
Absolutely. And insisting upon it too. If you
Yeah,
don't
you
call it
get
by
that.
this name, you're not getting it. You know
Oh,
what I
well,
mean?
we
It's
had
not
that
gonna be
over
original.
here, where at one
Pizza.
point the Welsh language was pretty
Mhm.
much banned.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, it just recently came back with the Irish equivalent, right? It's like region
well,
people.
Welsh has never gone away. Welsh is a living language, but
Mm,
whereas the Irish in Ireland, Irish is vanishing fast, sadly.
yeah,
Fine
Welsh
by
is
me because I
spoken.
can't get my tongue around it. But but it is vanishing. But Welsh is very much a living language. You go into a lot of the small villages in Wales, they do speak English, but naturally they'll tend to speak Welsh. Um, and they'll teach in Welsh. But at one point, we the English, if you like, and this is within my lifetime, wouldn't allow Welsh names on signposts and things like that. There was a kind of effort to kill off the language, and the reason behind it is people's identity is actually less flags, which I hate. I dislike flags because I don't like the idea of jingoism and over the top patriotism, this sort of my dog's bigger than your dog type attitude. I really don't like.
Scary,
But
right? It's real scary. I
exactly,
mean,
oh,
not the
absolutely.
yeah, it's real scary.
Nationalism is so scary. I mean, we spent Second World War fighting against nationalism, and now we're seeing it rise everywhere again. Oh well,
Mhm. It
but
never
anyway,
died out. It never stopped. I mean, not
well, it
to
never died
interrupt
out.
your
This is
thought
true.
process at the beginning, because I'm really interested, but nationalism is this thing that kind of happens
It's,
because of these
it's a
world wars, and
disease.
yeah, and we need to
um,
kill it. We need to nip it in the bud because humanity together is strong.
well, you'll
If
never
a
kill
person
it.
is,
You'll
if
never kill it
somebody's,
because it's natural. But
yeah,
people's
yeah,
real identity is in their voices.
yes,
Um, and in offshoots of that, like their clothes, but it's in their voices. It's
yeah,
in how they
say
communicate.
things. Absolutely.
So
That's what
uh,
differentiates us as a culture, your culture and my culture. I mean, we can talk about it all day long. There's certain little things that you say, like you smoke fags and I smoke cigarettes. You know,
yeah,
you take the lift, I take the elevator. There's these certain things that make you English that you will never get rid of because anything else is wrong. If I say elevator, you laugh at me.
that's right. Well, somebody came up with, and you look this up because I can't think who said it, which was two peoples divided by a common language, which is the way of describing England and
Say
America.
Winston Churchill probably said it or somebody of that nature. It
Yeah,
sounds tongue in cheek.
it might have been somebody called David Frost actually, but no, I don't think it was. I think he used it. I will look up this up vaguely while we chat. Hang on, two people divided by a common language. It is incredible. It's a brilliant phrase actually, if you think about it. And the more you think about it, the cleverer it is. Here we go. And it says, "Oh."
I have it right here. Let's see. Let's see. It says quote, and it is a dear quote investigator, 1987 playwright Oscar Wilde said it.
1887, it have to be, not 1987.
No,
He's
yeah,
long dead by
1887.
1988.
He's I meant 1887. Yeah, Oscar
Now,
Wilde has actually said a good number of things about language and culture and creativity. In fact,
yes,
you
well, I
know,
think he described fox hunters as the unspeakable in pursuit of the uneatable, which I rather like. Yeah, Oscar Wilde is died a lot. Oscar Wilde's brilliant, man. He's there's a good Irishman.
I knew it was an
Uh,
English guy. I knew it was an Englishman.
Irish.
Oh, it was the Irish. Oh, that's even
Oh, yeah.
worse.
Real original. So where are you? Where are you geographically?
I'm in New York City.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So my uncle was trade consul in New York City. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a long time ago.
This is a different city today. I don't understand what's happening out there. It's empty. It's scary. The people on the streets. I've said a bunch.
It will change. You know, the strange thing about this, a lot of people are saying this will change the world for life. Now, I used to be a dubbing mixer for British Pathé News. This was long after they stopped filming because I think they did their last film in 1969. So what we were doing was we were reusing their old footage from the wars and everywhere else, 52 million feet of it, reusing it to make new documentaries out of, and that's what I used to work on. And the funny thing is, you know, the Second World War was far more of an upheaval than this has been. Far more people died and all the rest of it. I mean, this has been a huge upheaval, but the Second World War was another scale entirely. And during the war, one of the most common things was to say the world will never be the same again. But funny enough, they were wrong. And one of the best examples of how they were wrong was a cartoon which was in one of the newspapers called the Jane cartoon. And Jane was this slightly flirtatious, mad young woman character. And she'd been in the cartoon newspaper for years. During the war, her skirts in the cartoon got shorter and shorter and shorter. And she got more and more and more flirtatious as people's whole idea about relationships and the very Victorian Edwardian hangovers of, oh no, we don't show our ankle and all that sort of stuff, all that drifted away. People didn't know, particularly in London, didn't know if they're going to be alive the next morning, if a bomb would have dropped on them. So they started having relationships all over the place, much more free sex and all the rest of it. Do you know, after VE Day, or probably VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, when everything went back, within a very short amount of time, her skirts became longer again.
Yeah, look at
it. Was interesting.
Also, we had
that change didn't last.
Yeah, things got very conservative in the 50s. I mean, they were really messy, and you don't hear anything about the latter part of the 40s. It's like they kind of said, this never happened. Everybody just shut your mouth.
Well, yes, and you're so much
to the
more.
50s.
And in the US generally, not in New York, I notice, but in US generally, you are much more religious than we are as well. So you had that batting against it as well.
Europe as a whole, though, you guys fall in line with the Europeans in terms of Christianity and all that good stuff. You're not very religious.
Not in the UK, we don't.
Completely. Are you religious?
Well, no,
not.
Well, you've got to remember, in the time of Henry VIII, we're going a bit of history for you here. In the time of Henry VIII, 500 and something years ago, we very noticeably broke away from the Catholic Church and set up the Church of England, which was Protestant. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because the Catholic Church wouldn't grant Henry VIII a divorce. It was actually more complicated than that, but that was part of it. So he set up his own church and told Rome to get lost. So ever since then, this country has been very, very different. We didn't have Catholicism. And in fact, they tried to oppress all Catholics here quite revoltingly.
Oppress.
And to this
Kill
day,
them. Brutally.
Well, yeah, burn them, some of them. I mean, and to this day, in Northern Ireland, in parts of Glasgow, in Scotland and things, we still have sectarian problems between Protestants and Catholics, even now. Less so, but it's still there.
That was that whole North Ireland thing was a difference in religion. Catholics
well,
Protestants.
Well, a part of it was the other part was the fact that the Irish in the south wanted to reunite Ireland. You got to remember, Ireland was one of Britain's conquests.
I mean, that's the thing, right? We talk about things being different versus being the same. I think you couldn't have the conservatism that happened in the 50s without that kind of liberal, thank God the war is over attitude. And I think now with the pandemic, I don't think this one necessarily is going to change anything. I think what will happen, though, is that going forward, coronaviruses just mean they're new viruses that we don't know what's happening. The permafrost melting in Antarctica is releasing so much gas in the next 10 years. We're probably going to have coronaviruses every single season. That'll strike us.
Well, those two aren't related, but actually interesting. You're saying about climate change is that is actually the exception to the rule. All of these things, whether it's the Second World War, whether it's bring your city into it, 9/11. I mean, 9/11 was shocking, but actually, if you put somebody in downtown New York now, possibly a bad example because the trade towers, but I don't know, put somebody in Harlem now and put some in that hadn't been there for 40 years, they would see Harlem grossly cleaned up to what it was 40 years ago, but they wouldn't see a scar over it that said 9/11 happened to Manhattan. You have to know about it to understand its impact. If you see what I mean.
No, I'm thinking about it because if I leave my apartment and I get on the subway, I think about it because it's not just 9/11, it's what was perpetrated.
you
You know what I mean?
well,
It was an
because
attack on
you think
peace.
about it because you were there.
No, I wasn't there at all. I was here,
Oh,
in the country, but my wife was here. She was up the street a little bit. She saw the second plane strike. There are
yeah. Well,
people all around me.
that's enough. You see, and it's very recent memory. This, so, but you need that memory. You need that recent memory. As time goes on, its impact gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and and this happens to everything. I mean, one of the most devastating things that happened in the last 100 years was the Boxing Day tsunami, 2013, was it?
My God, forget about it. Yeah, that was horrible.
Yeah. And I remember, I mean, because obviously as part of my offshoot of my job, I've been dealt with news a lot. I've done loads of news stuff over, and it's part of my job over the years. And one of the things you always get with all of these disasters is it sounds like it's going to be bad, and then it sounds like it's going to be worse, and then worse, and then worse, and then, oh, thank goodness it wasn't as bad as it was. You got that with 9/11. I mean, I was watching at the television.
They said 50,000 people could have potentially died, and 2,000 sounds a lot better. Yeah.
And if those planes had hit an hour later,
maybe it would
have been 20, 30, 40,000 people, because the reason it was much fewer, and thank goodness it was fewer, was because people hadn't got there yet. It was as if they hadn't arrived there yet. And that was very typical. The one exception to it was this Boxing Day tsunami, because I remember seeing that, and the report came in. They said, it's dreadful. We think anything up to 5,000 have died. And I thought, oh, that's awful. And then half an hour later, we think it's 10,000.
Yeah.
And the final toll was over 250,000.
Was it 1 million? I was going to say 500,000.
No, it was 250,000, over 250,000. And it was like, and it was the exception to the rule. And I was stunned because it was one of the few times where the number didn't come down. It carried on going up. And that was so, and I found that was one of the most scary things I've covered. I found that really scary, because this number, all these other things were terrible, devastating, left you in tears. But the number came down at the end of the day when they actually sat there and sorted out. They said, phew, it was horrible and we're going to be grieving and all the rest, but it could have been worse. This one was worse.
It was as bad as it possibly
crazy.
Almost as bad as it possibly be. You know what it actually did, though? I don't know if this is normal. I've been unfortunately plagued with this disease called writer. So my imagination kind of runs wild with me, but I can't go to the beach anymore without thinking about it. How this kind of happened. You know what I mean?
No, that's called paranoia.
Okay.
That's a different disease entirely.
I've seen some documentaries. I watched that movie a few years ago, and it's right up the worst thing I could possibly imagine happening to me or a loved one or any human being for that matter. 1 minute you're a family unit, and the next minute you're a person that just lost everybody, and you watch them get taken away from you on the beach. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
I grew up in Florida.
And this brings us on to climate change. Climate change is the next 2013 tsunami, because I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, but I'd say coming from a bit of a family of scientists, I tend to look at the science. Whenever one of these comes up, I always look to science. And it's a rarity that, again, the same thing, that every time they do new figures and they get the science better and they get the computer modeling better, the first thing they come up with is, oh, damn it, it's actually slightly worse than we thought it was going to be. Climate change is actually starting earlier than we thought it would be. And I'm beginning to get a slight sense of we're too late. And
they are in some places. I do agree. Some places are lost forever. And a lot of those places, we didn't really care about to begin with. A lot of those places are in Africa.
And you and I will be dead for the most of the impact.
My children won't be. And I don't know if you have kids or not, but my grandchildren or great grandchildren won't be. It's hard sometimes thinking about how I will have people that I love being affected by this. Lawlessness is one thing that really plagues me, because I look at my son and I wonder, in a world where he has to defend himself or die, is he, the little boy is 5 years old. So it's hard for me to think of him as a warrior. But that's one day what he potentially will have to be, right? If things go bad, he might have to defend himself and feed himself by drawing blood. I did it when I was a kid. I joined the military. You know what I mean? I lucked out.
Yeah.
There wasn't opportunities for me to ply my trade at that time. But if there had been, I would have gone out there and put bullets in people if I needed to. You know what I mean? Been a stupid 18-year-old and come home with nightmares, not realizing what I did until it's too late, because that's what all 18-year-olds do.
How old are you? Can I ask?
43.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So you didn't see the NAM stuff in that respect.
I didn't see NAM, and I did not see the nightmare of Afghanistan or Iraq. I did lose some buddies though in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it gives me nightmares thinking about how close I got. But thank God, no, I did not go.
Yeah, no, I mean that was bad. I mean, bad enough. I mean, I've got a couple of. I mean, because I'm a little bit older than you, but I mean, I wasn't old enough for NAM really. I was just 5 years too young probably. But I had a few of my friends, American friends, they were out there, and I mean, they didn't necessarily see the worst. Or rather, they did, but they kind of came through it all right.
How old are you? How, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 60. So
you're 60. Yeah, you're a little bit too young for it. You're 20 years older than me.
Yeah,
right? No, you're 17 years older than me. Actually, no, you're perfect age. No, are you 17 years old?
No, I'm just a few years out because I mean I was in 1976. I was 16.
So yeah, 76, 16. So you would have been way too young. They pulled out in 73.
Exactly. So
it's amazing.
I was just like 5, 6 years of it.
The nightmare of Vietnam is the letter that you got in the mail saying that you're going to be in the military. When I was 17 years old, I went, I'm volunteer. I'm doing this to myself. Whatever you guys want to do with me from now until I'm 22, up to you completely. Those boys at 17 years old, you got a letter in the mail saying, fuck your dreams. Let's go, buddy. Some Vietnamese people we want you to kill.
But there again, our parents did as well. My dad did.
Oh, I forget about it.
Because he was conscripted in 1940.
Genealogy is interesting because you have records all over the place. And one day I just really got lucky and I found my grandpa in 1941, New York City, drafted into the military, and he served. He was an air sergeant in England. I want to dig into that so bad, and I can't figure out any of the real information. But the most interesting part about that is his dad was drafted too, 46 years old. They called him up.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my God.
You could be called up to 48, you see.
Yeah.
So he was just 2 years inside it. He got called.
I don't know if he served, but it's like stunning. I'm 43 years old, and if something really drastically bad happened,
they would get called up.
They would take me. I mean, I'm fit. I mean, I can run miles. I'm strong as hell. You have old man strength right now. They would definitely want me to die for my country.
Yeah, they'd take one look at me and laugh.
But
my dad was quite lucky.
The fucked up part is I'm aware of the sacrifice now. When I was 18, that's like the perfect age because I would have done anything. I jumped out of helicopters. I fought people I shouldn't have fought.
You were indestructible.
I was indestructible. Death was not going to touch me. Death touched other people. And that's not the case. Death touches 17, 18-year-old, 19, 20-year-old kids. That's who dies in war.
I think that's an interesting thing about, this virus is, all right, there are some, we've had these statistics come over here, which are true, which is we've noticed that some ethnic minorities appear to be slightly more vulnerable to the disease. It's not a huge difference, but there's a little difference when nobody knows quite what's going on there.
It's a huge difference in this country. It's hitting those impoverished communities, and it's especially
that's the other thing. And we've also noticed separately that it hits impoverished communities, and a lot of that is probably to do with population density and things like that.
Yeah, and the fact that you can't be poor alone if you're in a family unit. You got to have support.
Exactly. So they're not going to get into the fine details of this for years because it's so complicated to try and get all the way through this. It's very easy to go, oh yeah, it must be that, But generally speaking, aside from those things that they don't quite understand yet, it affects everybody fairly equally, but depending on age and underlying health conditions. It doesn't care which country you're in. It doesn't care whether you love Trump or hate Trump. It doesn't care if you're white or black. It doesn't care all these things because it's a virus. And viruses don't have the ability to care. They just do their thing, which is get it passed onto a body and live off the body until they damage the body. That's what a virus does. And it's um hang on a second. I've just hit a dropout. Sorry. You still there?
I'm still here.
Right, sorry. Yeah. Everything just flickered around here. I'm not quite sure what happened there.
I
Right.
heard it. The virus does not care who you are, young, old.
No, exactly. And it's a wake up call, that. And you know, it's like what you listen to these arguments of saying, oh, it was definitely formed in a Chinese lab and 5G caused it and everything. You're bollocks. Even if that was true, which it probably isn't, it doesn't matter. It's a virus. And it shows that as a creature, we are much less in control of our world than we think we are.
Well, you have to be an idiot
and possibly
to think that you
even
are in any control of your life, like your individual little tiny life. You're not in control of jack shit. That's the messed up part about it. I mean, there is somebody down the street right now making decisions that could potentially impact my life in a half an hour. You know what I mean? I do not know what's going on beyond the sphere of my own, I don't know, acknowledgement, I guess.
And vice versa. Apart from the lockdown, you know, you could walk out of your door, get in your car, drive down the street, not look, and totally impact somebody else's life.
Totally.
You know, all these tiny decisions.
I mean, I think I had coronavirus, honestly. I mean, it's scary that you don't even know whether or not the really bad, awful sickness that you had was this thing. You know what I mean?
There are some basic clues. If you've had a bit of breathing difficulties, a dry cough, and a temperature, but not much else, then that's a sign that you've not definite, but it's a good clue that you had COVID-19
too.
However, if you've had a snotty nose.
No, this was so
as
bad,
well,
man.
and all that sort of stuff. Then you've had a cold.
And you know what was really worse about it was that after the cough went away and everything, the fever just stayed. Like the fever would not go away, and I just felt hot all the time.
Possibly you did. Do you live on your own, or are you with family?
I was with my wife and children then. I'm living on my own now.
All right. But it's. You know, it is very I mean, we're not going to know how many people have had it. I mean, at some point or other, they're going to have to try and get some sort of.
At the end of the day, it's less about who had it as to and more so how we handled it that I think needs to be addressed. I mean, diseases happen. That's what happens to humans. We've been messing with this since the beginning of time.
But the who have had it can affect what happens next, because for instance, let's assume that like flu, and it's looking like it's going to be like this but not definite, that once you've had it, it is unlikely you'll have it a second time, or at least not for some considerable period of time. In other words,
particular brand, I mean, it could mutate. You'll get the mutation. I mean, they're talking about this thing has like 12 or 13, or I mean, it's hard to say because sometimes you get stuck in the bubble.
There's a bit of rubbish. There's a bit of rubbish going on here because coronaviruses generally they're not flu. They're different types of viruses, and they don't mutate like flu does. So they tend to be far more stable, which is a good thing.
I mean, the articles that I read that said that were nightmares. I mean, they weren't saying good things, and it bothered me because I wasn't seeing it in other places.
There's a lot of stuff trying to compare it to the way flu works, and the point is H1, N1, and H3, N3, and everything. Those groups of viruses, which are flu, are very different types of viruses, and they work in different ways. And it's kind of dangerous to go the flu route, really. Particularly if you're Donald Trump and go, you know, it's a flu, it won't hurt us. You know, yeah, no, it's not, and yes, it will. You know, but
that guy, all he wanted to do was protect his economy and protect his reelection, and I don't know how the hell he got elected to begin with. So I don't know what's going to happen in November. I think he's going to get
I
reelected.
tell you, I can be terribly controversial about Trump because obviously I don't live in Trump land, so I don't.
You have your own brand of Trump. What do you think of what's his face?
Boris.
Yeah.
I'm no fan of Boris, but he ain't no Trump. And I tell you why, actually, apart from the fact that Boris does believe climate change is real and a few other bits.
That's a bonus right there. Good for you guys.
Quite. Yeah, we do have climate change deniers over here, but we don't have them in such large quantities. But the one of the big differences, and this is the difference between Trump and just about every other president I know anything about. I had the interest. I was put no way. There was this thing when George W. Bush was president about how stupid he was, and it was very much based on really the fact that he tended to stumble over his words like I do, and he wasn't a great presenter when it came to doing speeches, unlike Barack Obama, who probably has to be one of the best orators ever. Forget his politics, whether he's a good president or not. I know there's lots of arguments about that, but Jesus, he made brilliant speeches.
Right, he was such a
and he was so cool, and in a way that George Bush was never cool. But George Bush wasn't stupid. I mean, the guy went to Yale, Harvard, things.
Fighter pilot. He's a fighter pilot. I mean,
he was the only George W. Bush, his son. He was
a fighter pilot too. He didn't go to war. He was a National Guard guy, but they still gave him.
I don't know, but more to the point, people don't realize he's the only president who had a master's degree. No other president's ever had a master's degree. It wasn't a particularly good one, but he did have it, which nobody else has had. He wasn't actually stupid, and you can go back through history and find every other president has been said, oh, they're stupid. They said it about Reagan. He's stupid, but he was governor of California for years before he was president. He must have known something, and all the rest of this. Trump, however, I think is the actual first president ever that's actually genuinely stupid.
I don't know. I don't think
the guy is very bright.
I don't know. All I know is that if you put me in front of a camera and told me to say anything, I would probably shit myself a lot.
Oh, and me too. Yeah.
Right.
I used to play in bands, and I still would.
Right. I mean, he does something that I think is miraculous. He doesn't do it in a way that is wonderful. It's not art. You're not watching some ballet dance like you would be Obama. Obama could really affect the crowd. What he said, you listen to, and his effectiveness in office. You could argue that whether or not he did anything, he didn't. But if you look
at his personality.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. I mean, the way his presidential.
One of my favorite bits in recent American politics was, funny enough, was the speech that George W. Bush gave when he was about to leave the White House, and he was talking about handing over, and he was saying the normal polite words of, he's just there on his own about the fact that he'd be handing over to Obama, but you could see and you could hear that he was very, very conscious that he was going to be handing over to the first black president. Mm-hmm. And that meant so much to him, and he couldn't stop grinning. It was really, you dig it out on YouTube. It's a lovely clip. He absolutely loved the fact that he was handing over to the first black president. And he was and he didn't care that Obama was a Democrat. It was, I think it was the best person that could have won from Bush's point of view. And Bush is a man that comes from the South, remember, so he knows that side very well. And he was so proud to be handing over to the first black president. He's so sweet. It's really funny. I mean, I thought in a lot of ways he was a crap president, but I love that moment. I will give that moment to him of that joy.
He's an interesting historical character, in my opinion. He has this, I think he lost it at the end. I think that his 8 years in the office were horrible, like not only for him, but for the country and for the world. What he had to do, he killed so many people. Like just with his words, people died just because he said there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. 1 million people died.
Or more to the point, he believed there were.
I don't know if he
Uh,
believed that or not. Did he believe he was telling me a lie? I mean, that could have been the truth too.
no, I
I
think
had no
the
clue.
intelligence people were saying the likelihood was very high. There was some intelligence that was saying the likelihood was very, very low, but there was a lot of intelligence saying the likelihood high. There seems to have been a mass failure where both Bush and followed up Blair over here got wrong. I think was deciding to use the evidence that was on their side too selectively because they wanted Saddam Hussein out of there. Um, they wanted the one thing that the United Nations doesn't allow, which is regime change. Um, and as soon as they decided that regime change was going to be good for the region, because the things about America just wanted Iraqi oil and things, that was rubbish. America had loads of it. They didn't need it, the Iraqis oil at all. But what they wanted a more stable Middle East, and they felt the Middle East would be more stable without Saddam Hussein, which was probably true actually. But they got so hooked on that idea, they took what evidence there was and they used it as an excuse and they ran with it blindly. And that was their mistake. Um, I'm not a great one to saying it was criminal that they were war criminals for doing it or anything, but they did make a mistake, huge mistake.
So no,
Um,
my dad fought in Desert Storm in '91,
yeah.
and the
Well,
interesting thing for
that
me
was
is
different because Desert Storm,
it didn't
they
go.
went and got the objectives and they went and got out.
They went home. A lot of people think that HW failed in doing that. If he had actually turned his weapons towards Baghdad and captured Saddam Hussein deservingly in '91, he deserved, or '92 when that war ended, he deserved to get captured and sent to prison. And if W had done that, he would have won the next election, and the world potentially would have been different. There would be no
Oh yeah.
Clintons. I don't
Well,
mean you can
there
argue the
was the
Clintons all
thing
day
at the
long, but
time that George W. Bush was finishing off what his father started.
or Cheney
Uh,
for that matter. We all know that Cheney was actually in charge for 8 years.
well, they all were. I mean, these things inevitably they are teams. This is again where you're seeing differences with Trump because Trump will keep saying things via his Twitter account, which makes the rest of his team standing behind him
Yeah,
look suddenly really uncomfortable.
yeah, because
Uh,
it's most of those people. Those old people are still there. They've
yeah,
got old
and
Nixon
they
people there.
suddenly
They've
go into
got
panic mode
those
because
neocons.
Trump is saying something suddenly different to what they've been talking about for the last 3 weeks.
Or that
Whereas,
day, they probably briefed him and said, "Okay, this is what we should do. This is the neocon message or whatever." And he says, "Okay, I'll say it." And he'll fuck it up. They'll come out completely wrong, and they'll have to fix it.
that's right. Whereas Bush, Clinton, and all the rest, they do what they did what they were meant to do, which is sat around with their people and their civil servants, their paid employees, if you like, and non-political ones. They weren't through, came up with a decision, right or wrong, but they came up with a decision based on all kinds of opinions. And then they, as the president, were the mouthpiece that went and sold the decision
Yes.
to the American people.
Or told us what they decided, because that's basically how it worked. They didn't set
That's
themselves
right.
on shit.
But there was a lot of things going on behind there which we didn't know about. We don't know about. But there was huge amounts going on there. What's happened is those things are going on, and Trump's sitting there going, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and then he steps out and says something completely different.
What amazes me is that you're English. I mean, you're from the United Kingdom, and we could sit here and we could talk about history and how the dumb decisions for a man that I did not vote for affected both of us. You know what I mean? His decisions made your government do things, and that affected you as an individual. Two different countries. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, goddamn, we are viruses. We are a virus that is eating this planet alive, and the planet is trying to fight us back.
Oh, absolutely. Well, actually,
Oh,
worse,
absolutely.
worse because we go beyond the virus thing
What's
because
it
we're
called?
a
Parasite. That's what it would.
you know.
Man, I don't know. This has been a fantastic conversation. You are a genius, and I freaking loved every second of it. I've had you on for about an hour and 10 minutes.
I know. Sorry.
So I mean, do you have anything that you want to? I mean, I've been on your website. Obviously, we need to talk about that real quick. What?
Yeah. What do I do? Why do I do it?
Why do you do it? I mean, what is it that you're doing there? You are reading fairy tales, but are they fairy tales that you're pulling out of classic editions, or are you rewriting them?
Well, I'm doing all kinds of things because which websites have you been to?
Only the one that
Basically,
I found off Twitter.
was that the Deep in the Dark Forest one?
Yes, it is.
Right, because you also need to go to cchogan.com.
But that's where it was.
Oh,
cchogan.com.
right, okay, yeah. Well, Deep in the Dark Forest is my podcast, which is in a little bit of a rest at the moment because I've had to do a few other things, but we'll be coming back in a few weeks. With I'm going to be doing the Snow Queen, which will be done in 4 parts probably. The Deep in the Dark Forest, that's a little bit of fun really, because what I'm doing is I'm taking the earliest translations of some of the fairy tales I can find. Some of them I'm retranslating myself with the help of Google and things. And I'm just rewording them slightly, not hellishly, but slightly, just to suit my voice and make them a little bit more fluid to read and a bit more fun to read. And then the music on them, I'm writing from scratch. So it's all my original music and things on there.
Fantastic.
But the other side of what I do is I write books, and I've got this series called Dirt, and if you go to a website called aworldcalleddirt.com, you'll find all about that. I've written 2 series so far. There is a 3rd series in the back of my head, and currently, and that's a dragon-led series where these dragons don't blow fire. They live in villages. They're huge, but they are a genuine people and actually have a right to exist like everywhere else. And it's the twists and turns that happens with having 2 very distinct people, that the dragons and humans, that live different lengths of time and have different ideas about the world. Dragons, for instance, fly, so they're not big into territory. They don't see borders. It's very difficult to have privacy in your garden when your next door neighbor can just fly straight over it.
Yeah.
So they have so they live in a totally different context, if you think about it, like birds do. And then currently I'm writing this series of books, which I'm trying to find an agent for and failing dismally, called The Unicorn Chronicles.
I like the name.
And they are a lot of fun. And if you're in for a bit of a laugh, and particularly if you've got any younger kids, I'll send you a PDF of the first one, and you can have a private read.
My daughter loves unicorns, like you would not believe.
How old is your daughter?
5.
5. She's possibly slightly too old for her, but but I base this around a friend of mine's 11-year-old daughter, and she wanted a short story about a unicorn because she's mad about unicorns, and I said fair enough, and it's now ended up I'm writing book 7 at the moment, and it ended up a bit like Harry Potter, of following the main character, who's called Elwyn, from when she's 11 just till when she's about 18. And she's born and brought up in South London. She has 2 mums, which I did because the girl I based it on has 2 mums. So she has 2 mums, and she suddenly finds herself transported to this land where she meets a real unicorn. Except this is not a pink and blue fluffy creature with a cute voice who looks like it came from some daft Disney thing. Arion the unicorn is 40,000 years old. He's 22 hands tall. So he's huge. And he sounds like Anthony Hopkins, the actor. So he's got this wonderful, slightly Welsh accent and speaks like that, Arion. And he talks to Elwyn, and he's got his beautiful voice, and he's incredibly powerful, but he's missing his horn, his alicorn. And the whole books are based around the idea of this young girl who eventually becomes the most powerful Drew, which is what they call a wizard, if you like, growing up, all her growing pains, and going backwards and forwards between these 2 worlds and not sure where she belongs and all this sort of stuff, while having these very dangerous adventures with this beautiful unicorn and huge trolls and elves. Her best friend is an elf called Phelan and things. So it's this whole incredible adventure. But although it is a massive, great fairy tale, if you like, because I love fairy tales, there is also, she's an 11-year-old girl growing up with all the problems young people have when they're growing up as teenagers. She gets very depressed. She gets very angry. She gets worried. She has a friend in London who goes through terrible times, and she doesn't know how to handle it. So there's lots and lots of different layers here, and it's been so much fun to write. If I don't get an agent, I will self-publish in the end of it because it's a brilliant story. I'm very pleased with it, but it's huge. It's an epic adventure. It's kicking around 1 million words at the moment.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, I tend to write big books.
Well, I mean, you would almost consider that 10 books in a series, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm writing book 7 at the moment. There's probably 2 to 3 more books to go on it. Dirt was even longer. The Dragon series is kicking around 1.5 million at the moment, and I've still got 3 more books to write on that.
All of your work is indie, right? You've published all of your stuff yourself.
I have done, because I didn't particularly want to. I'd love to have a publisher pick my stuff up, but I don't know. Maybe my letters I write aren't good enough, or whatever it is. Maybe my books aren't good enough. Very difficult to tell. But
very difficult to tell. I mean, I wrestle with the same exact thing. I think that's a writer situation. It's historic, actually. I mean, we just don't know. Edgar Allan Poe publishes his own stuff. He was his publisher. The guy died in a gutter. So, I mean, that's our lot. That's what we do. We struggle with this dumb disease.
Yeah, I think it's also, there's a bit of a time scale here, because I've messed around. I mean, obviously, my entire life has been creative, whether it's been working in music, working on films, or all these kinds of things. I used to work on animation and stuff. So they're doing sound. And, so it's hugely long, very creative career. But a few years ago, my life changed for one complicated reason or another, and I ended up working from home and coming to live with my mother to help her out, because she's getting very old. She's 96 now, and since a relationship of mine had gone south, it worked out well for her. So, and I've been here for a few years. So because I was working from home and looking after her, I thought, right, I'm going to get over this hiccup of actually finishing a bloody book, because I hadn't finished one, and I'd half written The Stink, which we talked about earlier, and I thought, right, I'm going to finish it. And I did. I sat down and I finished it. It was 130,000 words long, and I thought, bloody hell, I've written a book. I don't care if it's good or bad or whatever it is, I have written a book. Let me write another one. And suddenly I've written, Jesus, how many, if I've not all published, obviously, but I've written 10, 70, 19 books. Not all published yet, but
and this is since 2005, right?
No, this is since 2014.
So you've done this in 6 years? That's incredible.
Yeah. I write at an outrageous rate.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess. What are you saying? You've written about 1 million words on these stories. I've written about
in total. I've written I've written about 2.5, 3 million, I would think. Right. But I write. I tell you what it's down to. It's this interesting thing to come down to. I don't know how you plan your stories, but I've got a real method that I use. I come up with an idea. And I come up with a potential title. It might change, but I use it as a kind of an anchor. I will then, what I'll often do is I'll write the first chapter and just see where it's going. And if I think it's going the right sort of direction, I then stop. I use OneNote. I love OneNote. I'm addicted to OneNote.
Is that an Apple thing?
It will run on Apple. Yeah, I mean it's Microsoft. It's part of Microsoft Office.
Okay.
And you can get it free as well. It runs free. And I've actually made a template which is on my website that you can download, which is a novel writing template for it. So it's broken into books and sections and things. So, and I start writing the most outrageous notes. My notes are nearly as long as the books. I plan like crazy. And I love the planning. It's so much fun. I don't do the rigid, I don't do it like I'm doing a thesis or something. So I don't do neat bullet points and, how tall are my characters. I don't do that bollocks. when I design a character, I bet that I sit there and chat about them as if I'm telling about somebody I just met down the pub. And I'll say, well, she's about 5'2", and you know, she has really short temper, and I'll sort of waffle about them. And I have acres and acres of words of waffle about characters and places. I love drawing maps, and you know, the maps on the site, they're all drawn by me. And so and I'll perhaps draw the characters themselves. I'm not a great artist, but I'll have a go, and things like that. And so slowly this world grows.
Is the art yours on your website?
Yeah, all of it's
I
mine.
love it. I like it a
thank you
lot. I
very
wanted to
much.
mention it.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's all mine. I'm not an artist, but and it takes me bloody forever to do those, but I do. I get a lot of fun out of it.
It's
And so,
possible that you just don't know the definition of artist, maybe. Because
no,
you're
no. The sad thing is
finding.
I've got several artists, including several relations, friends who are very good artists, and you know, I see them going to tears when they see me try and draw. So,
Oh no! Oh no!
they sit there wincing in exactly the same way as I wince if somebody sings out of tune. So,
Oh well, yeah. I
so
got
fair
that.
enough.
Everybody winces when somebody sings out of tune. That's universal. But
No,
no, I mean, I
sadly, some
appreciate
people
your art.
don't.
I
And
love it. It
noticeably,
looks
the
like
person singing out of tune doesn't wince.
no. Well, sometimes they do when they get punched in the face when they're told to stop and they don't.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
They
don't
wince for
sing
like
out
a
of.
couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm very naughtily trying to listen to your accent here, and because I've got to actually possibly do a New York accent for something. I don't know how to do a New York accent, so I need to work
I
on
don't
this.
really speak with a New York accent. I speak with a
No, but
hodgepodge.
you've got odd bits of New York in there, which keep floating. Well, you've lived there for a bit, so
Yeah. I guess this is the Gulf of Mexico, Florida accent mixed in with just been everywhere in the entire world. My mom grew up in Brooklyn. My dad's a West Virginian. So I mean, I have the most confused accent on the face of the planet.
well,
Non-regional.
I'm recording this audio book for somebody at the moment, which is called Annie and the Ripper, and it's quite a daft story, but it's quite nicely written about what would have happened if Annie Oakley had been involved in the hunt for Jack the Ripper in London, because what Buffalo
God damn
Bill's
it, that's
Wild
a
West
good
show
idea, and now I'm mad. I don't like
yeah,
it when a
it
good
did,
idea
because the
happens
Buffalo
and I
Bill
don't
show
have
did
it.
come over to London in the late 19th
Yeah, you
century,
did.
so it's not the thing. But of course, it was written by an American, but I'm reading this as a Londoner, which is why they've come to me, because I'm a Londoner. And obviously most of the voices in London, but I do have to do Annie Oakley and a few other Frank Butler, her husband, and a few other people. Though Frank Butler, I'm not quite sure how to approach him because he's actually Irish. But so,
Irish.
but I think most Americans think he was American, so I might have to do him as American. But of course, Annie Oakley's Midwest. So in fact, most of the characters are Midwest. So I've been sort of, trying to work
I
out
would bet he hid his
Midwest
accent.
slightly.
I
Pardon?
bet he hid his accent. If he was Irish at that time, I guarantee he was pretending not to be. So like if you look up fake New York accents or something along those lines,
Well, yeah,
I bet
so
that's
he
how
was
he
in the
sounded.
Midwest. He was in the Midwest.
Right?
He wasn't in
You're like
New
a
York.
fake Chicago accent, something really strong
I
and
know.
obvious. Like how would you do an accent? Somebody faking it, and that's basically I bet he was doing. Because man, we hated the Irish at that time. We hated them. We did not want them here. When the Italians the same way. That's when my family came. Couldn't stand them.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm running into a few things on the book, which is quite funny because it's written by Americans. So in the first chapter, there's a reference to a trash can. We don't have trash cans over here. We have rubbish bins. We don't call them trash cans. And also, he's referring to beer as bitters with an S on the end, whereas of course it's bitter. It's bitter singular.
Bitter. Is it just an ale or is it something different or a lager?
Your bitter is actually it's a pale ale.
What is it? Okay.
Quite a strong one, but but it was originally they weren't called bitter at all. It was a sort of a kind of a common thing which you heard in the pubs to differentiate it from mild ale, which was also around at the time. So you had mild and bitter was the two things, and eventually the breweries themselves adopted the name bitters because it was being used in the pubs. But he's written bitters plural all the way through the book, which is like a nuisance. So I'm dropping the S. But
And you're
but
letting
I've
her
got.
know, you're giving her notes while you do it too.
I've told the publisher. I said the publisher, and the publisher said, "No, do it. You do it correctly." And he said this book was written by an American. But I say I've got to work on to doing Annie Oakley and speaking this slight Midwest accent with no ings or ins. I'm speaking nothing of what you're doing about, and that do that pulled L they do that pull where the L goes into the back of the throat. So I've got to work. I've got to start recording it tomorrow. So I've got to work on that this afternoon.
I bet she faked being aristocratic too. I bet she faked like a posh accent.
No, she didn't. No, she's an interesting lady actually. She was very strong character, and she was very much her. She was a young woman as well, and she was proud of. It's interesting because a lot of the people, including Bill Cody and everything else, the whole lot, they're all Midwest. They're all Ohio and all that area. They weren't Texans and things. Interesting enough, they were all Midwesterns. As people, that was their background. So, and from what the little I know about your country, Midwest people are very proud of being Midwest people.
they're very grounded. Yeah, I think grounded would be a great term for them. They're very proud to be hardcore or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, they hang on. I mean, the North Midwest and the South Midwest accents are a bit different because South Midwest and you start getting this slight nasal thing you get down in some Southern Texans things. So it starts sounding a little bit more squeaky down there. But Northwest tends to be a bit more rounded. But they I've been listening to loads of people from the regions, and they all really hang on to their accent. They back to where we were saying about your language defines you. More than anything else does, and they sort of most people instinctively know that, and they just hang on to their accent. It makes people like me who comes from North London, and I have a father's family all from Cockneyville, but my mother's family were Irish, but spoke because they were all colonial British, spoke ever so nicely like this, and I'm this sort of fake in between somewhere.
Well, I mean, for me, it's all cognate, isn't it? I just listen for things that I understand and fill in the gaps with every language. Even if I'm in Germany or Italy, I mean, I just listen for how things fit. It's just really.
Well, the Germans particularly are very precise about their language. They don't allow much variation in their language. So although you get some, for instance, down in Bavaria, they'll say Milch rather than milk and things like that. But generally speaking, it's a very precise language. Grammatically, you can't cheat German. It has to be in a set order or it just doesn't work. Whereas English, we can say things backwards. I mean, if you think of Yoda, Yoda is speaking English and turns the sentence. Well, actually, they turn the sentences into German by putting the verb at the end, and yet we totally understand him. No problems at all. Nobody who speaks English can't understand Yoda, even though he's speaking the language backwards. Effectively, we can do that in English, but that's also a problem.
Yeah,
because which is the right way round?
It's a very versatile language, and I think that's because it's been so adaptable by foreign cultures moving into England or England moving into foreign cultures.
Well, it's also the biggest language. English has got the biggest vocabulary of any language.
Because of our being able to assimilate different cultures. It's fascinating. I mean, I think the future...
Or steal them, probably.
Steal them? No, because we invite I guess. I mean, you went to India and put a colony there, and I guess you came here and put a colony here too.
Yeah, you're quite late, you see. I mean, and invented as well, because Shakespeare invented loads of words. Don't ask me what. Go and look them up. But
the number is huge. The number is gigantic. In fact,
he actually invented words.
You can, as a writer, you can gauge yourself on your vocabulary based on what Shakespeare used. He's the most prolific writer in the history of the English language. Like the number of words he has used to create his stories is absolutely insane.
The best one, we'll leave it on this because I need to go and actually cook dinner for my mother, but is what Shakespeare sounded like. Because there is something called, I don't know if you come across it, called original pronunciation. And original pronunciation is the way Shakespeare would have spoken. And actually all his actors would have spoken, and they wouldn't have sounded like Laurence Olivier or John Gielgud. You would have not got to be or not to be. That is the question. Didn't exist at that time. That's very, very, very modern. Back at that time, they spoke in OP, and OP was more like West Country, so it would have been to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether it be nobler in the heart to suffer the slings and arrows. That's how Shakespeare was originally spoken.
It's awesome.
When you hear it in OP, if you look up on YouTube, you'll find some Shakespeare said in OP. It changes it. It transforms it. Actually, it brings it to life.
Yeah, I imagine it would. That's the language. That's how they live.
It's being spoken and in the accent of the time.
So beautiful. I mean, God damn it. And that's what makes me want to write, honestly. It's so beautiful. Man, you're going to come back on my show again. I'd love to continue this conversation with you at another time. I'm sorry I took up so much of your time. I wasn't planning on getting into the second hour like this. But
that's right. Well, thanks very much indeed.